The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines declared a state of emergency on Thursday, April 8th, and gave an evacuation order for persons living in the red zone. The Lassafre volcano erupted explosively on Friday, April 9th, 2021, and several other explosive eruptions have followed since. The University of the West Indies has activated its relief response to the eruption under the theme Rally Round SVG. This evening's program looks at the UWI's response. Good evening. I am your host, Cleveland Sam. Welcome to Rally Round SVG, a program produced by the University of the West Indies and brought to you on UE TV. I have 4 special guests this evening who are going to take you through the UWI's response. Let me first introduce Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Professor Beckles, welcome.
Be here. Great pleasure.
Luz Longsworth, Pro Vice Chancellor, Global Affairs and Pearl of the UWI Open Campus. Dr. Longsworth.
Good evening, and it's good to be with everyone this evening.
All right. Professor Richie Robertson, Lead Geologist, the UWI Seismic Research Center. Professor Robertson, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here and to be participating in this activity, which is extremely important.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Francis Severin, and he is the Deputy Principal of the UWI Open Campus and also co-chairs the Open Campus's Emergency Management Team. Professor Beckles, I'm going to start with you as the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Can you contextualize for us the UWI's response to the eruption of the Soufrière volcano in St. Vincent and the Grenadines?
I certainly can, and if you tell me how much time I have, I will exercise prudence. Give me a sense of
I'm going to give you 3 to 5 minutes, Professor.
There you go. Well, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I should begin by saying what a tremendous honor and pleasure it is to be on this panel with my colleagues and under your chairmanship, sir. But to be with my colleagues, principals, deputy principals, and of course, our Professor Robertson, who is on the ground there in St. Vincent. Let me say this. You know, we are a public university. We are the Caribbean's premier public university. And we are here to serve. And we are not a for-profit university, though everyone knows that we must manage our affairs in a business-like fashion, but we're not here to deal with the bottom line. We're here to deal with the protection of the people of the Caribbean. And public universities are designed to serve their communities in multiple ways. Our task is to see all the areas of vulnerability and work to strengthen them, see all the areas where certain strengths exist and how to sustain those strengths. So we are here in service. We are a service university. We are not here to serve ourselves. We are here to serve the people of the Caribbean. And this is an area of service that is absolutely critical to the existential reality in the Caribbean. So yes, this university took it upon itself to respond to that mandate, to be seen to be always activists. And in our current strategic plan, we have as a concept building the activist university. What are all the big challenges facing the Caribbean people? We are going to be active in those issues. The climate change issues, the volcano issues, the issues around chronic diseases, the issues around COVID-19, public health, in all the areas of concern and threat to the people of the Caribbean. The UWI will develop and deploy its specialist skills in those circumstances to help to alleviate, to strengthen, and to protect. This is what we are here to do. And I'm so excited, so pleased that our Seismic Research Center that has been out there in the field for many, many, many decades, building up this expertise at the moment represented by Prof. Robertson and his team in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that they were deployed there since December 2020 when the sound and the rumbling began to take place, and they were deployed there to make sure that the government had the best possible global expertise available to it. And when Prime Minister Gonzalez said to me 3 days ago, he said, what would we have done without the presence of UWI's expertise? And he gave praise, he thanked us all for being there by the side of his nation. And I had the pleasure of saying to him, this is what we are here for. In much the same way, we are helping all the governments of the Caribbean in managing the COVID-19 pandemic, the medical faculty, UWI science, UWI medicine. Well, UWI science is here on the frontier, out there helping our people, our community with the best expert knowledge available in the world. We know this volcano. Professor Robertson, he knows this volcano as if it was his child. He knows it. He's been dealing with it. He has that cutting edge understanding, and everything he has said so far has come to be. And I'm happy to know that the government is of the opinion that the provision of accurate, dependable science coming out of the UWI Seismic Center has helped them to go forward in managing this process. So that, my friend, is the context and some of the content of UWI, the activist university, in an area of national need, of regional need, and we are there to do what we are supposed to do.
Thank you so much, Professor Beckles. And indeed, Professor Robertson, you know this volcano. In fact, today is 42 years to the day, April 13th, 1979, when the La Soufrière volcano erupted. My understanding, Professor Robertson, is that you are actually involved in those efforts. Now, how has that experience influenced where you are today?
Well, you can say that the 1979 eruption of La Soufrière is what created the career path and the life I have left to a large extent. In 1979, I was in sixth form and actually was doing arts rather than sciences, and the eruption happened. And the eruption had such an impact on, I guess, on my young psyche that I decided that you needed to have Vincentians who were knowledgeable about this system to be able to manage it. And you need to have people in the region who were sufficiently experienced and knowledgeable to deal with it. And that is what set me on the path. So it's amazing. I never expected that in my lifetime I would be in this position. So it's amazing to be here. So that's why, I'm part of a large team of scientists from the Seismic Research Center who's been providing advice and support to the government. I'm glad that so far we've to a large extent gotten it right. It's very uncertain, the systems that we're dealing with. So it's a challenge, it's difficult, but we are cognizant of the fact that no matter how difficult it is for us, I think it's even more difficult for the people who have to deal with it. Volcanoes are amazing things, but they cause destruction and damage. Even though the process of volcanism is how life and land and the territories we occupy, the beautiful countries in the Caribbean were created. So even though they destroy, they also build up. But in their destruction, people have to deal with them, and therefore the impact is tremendous. And that's the case in St. Vincent. So while I'm, as a scientist, glad, and as a person, as an individual, glad that I'm able to provide support, I'm aware also of the tremendous damage and destruction it has done and it could do. It's not finished yet. I'm glad of the chance that the contribution that we could make and Seismic could make in making a difference.
Awesome. And we just saw some imagery from the eruption today, in fact, a time-elapse video. And I mean, can you describe what happened first, Professor Robertson?
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess, as I said, this volcano has, it's the volcano that I spent a lot of my life studying, and it continued to amaze us in the sense that it has taken apart in this eruption that because we had instruments on the ground, we had put in on that monitoring system, and we happen to have a set of people here on the ground who have significant experience in understanding seismic signals, particularly from volcanoes and how volcanoes erupt, that they were able to detect and understand what was happening. But in doing that, the volcano actually has operated so far in a very classic way in terms of the signals it has put out indicating what it's doing. And I don't think I would have believed that on the 13th of April, it would repeat almost exactly what it did on the 13th of April, 1979. In other words, not only has it erupted today, around the same time it did on the 13th, 42 years ago, but the kind of eruption it had today, this specific kind, what's called a volcanic explosion, is very much like what it did on the 13th of April in 1979. And what that means is that essentially gas-rich magma, which is the material that comes from beneath the surface of the Earth, and which between 27th December up until early April was oozing out, this gas-rich magma obtained sufficient energy and the conditions were such that early this morning, it essentially exploded and it pushed a lot of fragments of rock into the atmosphere. And those fragments of rock, you see the billowing clouds, they have a lot of gas in it and they rose. But in addition to rising up, they actually also collapsed on themselves and they produced these density currents that went down the mountainside. And we were able to, from the observatory, see them and observe them. So, it's almost giving us, this volcano, even though as it destroys St. Vincent, unfortunately, it's giving us a lesson in volcanoseismology, because the signals it's producing, once you know what you're looking for, once you have the experience, it's doing exactly what the signals tell us it wants to do. And that's why we've been able to track it and determine what's doing, and actually to provide the advice that the government needed to take the action it needed. So it's extremely interesting scientifically, but it's also very interesting personally, because it's sort of, you couldn't ask for a more classic eruption to manage as a scientist and provide advice. And so we're very glad that it's, to a large extent, it's not behaving well because it's erupting, but to a large extent, the way in which it's erupting, once you know what you're looking for, you could track it and you could follow it. And so far, it's been doing that. So we're thankful that it's operating like that, so we can manage it properly.
Interesting stuff. It's almost predictable, you say.
Well, we can't predict eruptions, but it allows us to provide fairly well-constrained forecasts of what it's likely to do.
Right. All right. I want to bring in Dr. Luz Longsworth, who is the principal of the UWI Open Campus, also with responsibility for global affairs for the entire university, Pro-Vice Chancellor Global Affairs. Dr. Longsworth, as I said in my intro, the UWI immediately activated its relief response. Can you speak to what UWI has been doing thus far for the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Dr. Sam. And first, let me just express on behalf of all of my colleague principals and the senior management team our deepest concern for and our solidarity with the people and the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines as we go through this very difficult time of coping with the eruptions from La Soufriere. Be assured, as always, as the Vice Chancellor has already said, that the University of the West Indies is committed to supporting all of our countries through these difficult times. And indeed, we have done so over the years. The UWI has worked hand in glove with all of our countries during times of disasters. And our immediate response is in line with what is recommended, which is to look after the people and to ensure that lives are safe and that people are out of harm's way. So, of course, we are particularly focused on ensuring that we can support the persons who have had to be evacuated And our university has mobilized its entire community, our students, our staff, and the countries that we serve to support in multiple ways. This is the first phase of our support always, and it's no different in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, except, of course, that while we are very used to having hurricanes, we have not had many volcanic eruptions that are so unpredictable. Although Professor Robertson is doing a very good job in warning us, but we're not sure when this event will really end. So our support has to be guided by the science and the advice that we're getting from Professor Robertson and his team as to what is necessary. And we have our UWI Open Campus site that's on the ground there, that's led by Mrs. Deborah Dalrymple. And that's an enormous advantage because we get up-to-date information. In fact, we knew when the first eruption happened, just as it happened. So we're very able to respond in an agile way.
All right. And speaking of the UWI Open Campus Countryside on the ground, with us is also Dr. Francis Severin, former director of the Open Campus Countrysides, now deputy principal of the campus. Dr. Severin, you also chair the Open Campus Emergency Response Team. What has the team been up to in terms of responding to St. Vincent and the Grenadines?
Yes, a very pleasant good evening, warm good evening to each and every one of you here on the panel, this August panel, and special good evening and good night to our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It is a pleasure to be on this panel. And in fact, as I listened to Professor Robertson, I couldn't help but ponder and ruminate over, the strategic plan of the University of the West Indies 2017-2022, where the Vice Chancellor says in his preface, fine universities are not established and funded to serve themselves, but to commit to engage the challenges facing their host communities. And I mean, even at that time, how could one appreciate the extent to which that statement would be authentic and legitimate? And that is why I feel so much joy in being part of this great institution that really serves our people in a very practical way, where STEAM comes together: science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics. And I was very interested when Mr. Richardson said that he started off as an art student, and this is very important. But our science and arts and humanities have come together, have really, in a sense, conjoined in order to serve us. And yes, I am the co-chair of our emergency management team. It seems to me that the University of the West Indies Open Campus in particular, given the fact that it's so distributed around the region, it seems to me that given our hurricanes, given our, now Volcano, we have tropical waves to deal with, tropical storms, floods, all manner of natural hazards. It is becoming more the norm rather than the exception. So we are in that mold, I have to say, Dr. Sam. And yes, on April 9th, Friday last week, of course, as soon as the major eruption occurred, I convened a meeting with selected members of the Open Campus leadership team in order to gain a sense of our state of preparedness and, of course, to activate those plans. And the first thing that we actually did, and through our CFO, was to open up and set up 2 accounts. And the information of these accounts are actually provided, I think, through press releases and so on. But suffice it to say that one Eastern Caribbean account set up in Antigua at CIBC First Caribbean, it's a disaster relief account, and another US account set up temporarily for the disaster relief in the Cayman Islands. and so our diaspora, people far and wide, can donate to that account. An email address was immediately so that people and those who intended to give donations could actually, seek, clarification, ask questions, and make queries, and find out all they perhaps may want to know in terms of provision of donations. And that is sent.vincent.recovery@open.ue.edu. And that is really monitored by a staff member, Mrs. Janella Samuel Austin, in my office as Office of Deputy Principal. And so she will be able to redirect, queries and inquiries as they occur. We, of course, as is our wont, we think of our students at all the time. We really always focus on our students. They're the ones first, and they're our raison of debt. And we have 572 or thereabouts students in Senate-approved online programs in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we have taken several steps to ensure that no violence, so to speak, or injury is done to their advancement. And I can give you an example, and I should say to you that we have always had a disaster preparedness and hazard management protocol in place, which our students are aware of and which they can find on the portal and which they can read at all times. But specifically in this case, given the fact that the communications infrastructure had not been affected, email messages have been sent to individual students, adjunct staff, and all semester 2 teaching staff to alert them of the situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and that courtesies for extension of assignments and due date will be in effect. And that is, of course, with no penalty applied. We have done that in other disasters as well, including COVID. And this has been communicated to the students, to affected students. Disaster preparedness and hazard management protocol is also posted in the student portal, as I have said, and a similar notice is also posted to the tutor-student exchange, so that the tutors are aware of the information that the staff, or the students, are receiving, so that there is mutual intelligibility. The tutors know what is happening with our students. And as I reflect on that, I want to really commend our team in the academic programming and delivery division, led by our director, Dr. Denise Gaspard Richards, for the hard work that they are doing behind the scenes. And that's very important in keeping the machinery for our students, well-oiled and continuing. The disaster preparedness and hazard management protocol is shared with the St. Vincent and the Grenadines head, whom you heard our principal spoke of earlier on, so that she can also communicate with them and in a knowledgeable fashion, so that there is consistency of communication and information. The program managers at APAD will monitor courses with affected students and staff to offer support and guidance where necessary. And if connectivity should be affected or disrupted, Open Campus has developed a functional mobile app. And we're hoping that this doesn't happen in this case, but we have developed, and preempting anything untoward, functional mobile app that allows students to work offline in their courses, upload assignments, and post to forums, and the content is stored and date stamped for live update when connectivity is restored. The course coordinators and course instructors have been asked to grant considerations for extensions, as I've said, to all students, but with special attention to the students in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We are fully cognizant of the fact that while this is happening, the ash effect, which is quite, unprecedented, I've never seen that in my life before, is also affecting the psyche, I have to tell you, of our students in Barbados and St. Lucia as well, because our students are a community, and what affects one affects the other. So we are cognizant and sensitive to that as well. Notices have been posted in the courses with assignments due this week. And most of the courses have completed assessment activities. Affected students are being asked to reach out if they're experiencing any challenges, and the course coordinators and the course instructors are accommodating them. Also, the manager for online programs has met with the Assistant Registrar, Assessment Awards and Records, who is Mrs. Wendy Nurse-Weeks, for the necessary agreement in regard to the delay submissions of grade sheets and so on. You see, one process affects the other, but being very experienced, we are dealing with that as well. We also have continuing professional education students. And these students, we do not treat them as peripheral. They are very important. We have 135 of those students. And there's a bit of duplication in that some students are doing more than one program. And the way it operates is not online, like in the sense of the online programs, Senate approved programs that I've described. But so sometimes you do have tutors who are in St. Vincent, for instance, but remotely tutoring those students. And we had pivoted to all of that during COVID-19. What we have done really is we have paused classes this week to assess where we're at. Mercifully, the classes are close to the end, so it's wrapping up soon. So again, we want to assure students that no harm or injury would be done to their advancement. We're taking care of student and staff psychosocial needs. And again, very experienced in that. And fortuitously, our head in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mrs. Deborah Dyrampel, she has a lot of experience in that, and this is her area, along with our director of the Consortium for Social Development and Research, Mrs. Cecile Minot. That is, counseling sessions are being arranged. The students will be contacted via WhatsApp. I think our guild is very intimately involved in contacting students as well. Hopefully, what would be done is that both group sessions and individual sessions will be arranged to accommodate our students. And some tips would be issued online in terms of coping mechanisms. Alumni contributions, alumni relations matters are all part of it too. Mrs. Sandra Griffith-Carrington, who is our campus officer of alumni relations, has already been working tirelessly with alumni and friends and has secured some pledges, I gather. In fact, in terms of physical needs, tomorrow we would be packaging some water, which is very, very, very critical and crucial for St. Vincent, which our staff will contribute, staff and others, well-wishers will contribute to. And these will be sent down to St. Vincent, or sent across to St. Vincent. In fact, while I say this, I want to really thank the Barbados Coast Guard and Lieutenant Gordon Maxwell, as well as Captain Wesley Beckles of Barbados Defense Force. I'm not too sure whether it's really at all to Professor Beckles, but Captain Wesley Beckles. As I said, WhatsApp group chats are being put together. In fact, we have the WhatsApp group chat with the OC leadership and some staff on the ground, where we exchange information very, very quickly and on time. So we get those regular updates so that we have a sense of what is happening on the ground. I also think it is appropriate to really commend our student guild who have worked with us through everything. If ever the term could be, the turn of phrase, through thick and thin could be employed, I think this is the occasion to employ it. And our President Leon Dawson and his team, they work with us very well. They intend to make some donation through the Student Guild as well. And they will be doing a lot, taking part in the WhatsApp contact with students. But very importantly, they are helping to ensure that any misinformation or any misunderstanding, and you know what happens in social media these days, they, rather than the open campus leadership team per se, they go out there and put themselves on the front line and say, look, this is not correct information. here is the correct information. And they have been working with us, and really I commend them. Our staff in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, believe it or not, under stress, under strain, but keeping good spirits, and they have gone out to some of the shelters to provide assistance where they can help, support, comfort, goods, and so on. You know, I am sorry, Dr. Sam, you know, I'm going to stop now, but I'm very passionate about this University of the West Indies and how it serves the region. And I really want to commend all my colleagues, our principal, the Open Campus leadership team, our staff on the ground, our staff all over the region for really, you know, rallying behind our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. When these disasters take place, we get even closer. I, being from Dominica, I have seen a lot of, been the, so to speak, victim, so the victimized, so to speak, by Hurricane Maria and so on. So, you know, it is really heartwarming when colleagues come together. I have to say that part of what makes me survive is feeling that the University of the West Indies is there with us. So this is what I will say for the time being.
Thank you, Dr. Severin. Principal, I want to come back to you for just a bit. The Vice Principal did mention the alumni, and I know from the UWI Office of Alumni Relations that there are also some relief efforts that are taking place. Do you want to elaborate on us?
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, the generosity of our people, as Dr. Severin says, we, you know, what affects one affects all. Or I think you schooled me to say that in St. Vincent it would be, if you hit one, you hit all, right? So there has been a real coming together of not just the UE community present, but the alumni, the diaspora. So we have a couple of other ways that persons who are maybe not in the region can contribute. The UE Alumni Association, through the Office of the Director of Alumni Affairs, has set up a donation site on their own webpage, and that information will also be given to you this afternoon on the screen. And that allows alumni internationally to donate, or anyone to donate through that portal. The American Foundation for the UWI also has set up a system which would allow persons in North America to donate through the American Foundation for UWI website, or even to mail in checks. And that information can be found at afuwi.org. And again, we will have that information for you. And just to note that donations through AFUI will receive tax credits. So those are the ways that we have now. In fact, there are other efforts going on across the region. All of the sister campuses are doing their relief efforts in collecting goods, water. As you've heard, the Open Campus has a shipment tomorrow, but all campuses are using COVID protocols, of course, accepting donations of non-perishable items, over-the-counter supplies, sanitary and hygiene items that we will have sent to the shelters to support our brothers and sisters there, and of course facilitated through the Open Campus that's on the ground there. So once again, I want to thank them, Mrs. Dalrymple and the staff of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines site for being, the stabilizing force. And this is what the university is all about, as both Dr. Severin and VC have said, that we are not here to serve ourselves, but to serve the people that who have put us here. So we were very glad to have that support from our physical site there, and thank them for their sacrifice, even though they too are undergoing difficult times in coping with the crisis. So there are many ways to contribute, to rally around, and this is a longer term event. that we have to monitor, and the needs may change as we go forward. So we will keep our fingers on the pulse, and certainly on Professor Robertson's pulse, because he has the pulse of the volcano, and it will guide us as to what next. But our donations, we are targeting for the education system, supporting students in particular who may be displaced and whose education may be at risk at this point, and also in terms of the health services, particularly at this time of COVID-19. So those are the areas that we have earmarked initially. But of course, we will be working closely with the government, with the agencies, the aid agencies, to see what else we can do as a university to support the recovery efforts.
Thank you very much, Principal Longsworth. I want to tell Professor Robertson that there are a number of questions we have, but I'm going to go to the VC. VC, hearing all of this magnificent work, how does this fit in really with the UWI's mandate of service to the region?
Well, it is precisely and directly what we do. Our resources are allocated in such a way as to be always considering how best to uplift our many communities and the challenges they are facing. Now, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, of course, is a critical part of the university's higher education ecosystem. We have a society that is heavily committed to university education within the UWI context. The government and people have just invested a considerable sum of money in building out the open campus site there in Kingstown, and the university is very proud of that national investment. The government has invested very heavily in educating young Vincentians across the campuses of UWI. We have a considerable number of Vincentian students across our system, and we can feel the energy. We can feel the pulse of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in respect of higher education. So for us to be here to assist this society, not only with the direct effect of the volcano, we have, as we know from what we've heard, Prof. Robertson and his team, including those back home in St. Augustine campus at the Seismic Center. But the consequences, there are going to be consequences. There are going to be consequences in the area of verifying the structures of buildings that might have been damaged. We will have to mobilize our engineers, our civil engineers, our mechanical engineers to participate in that process of structure verification. We might have to get our people to go in and look at the water supply and its suitability for consumption. We will have to send in our agricultural people to look at the farming community, the crops, the food supply, the indigenous production of foodstuffs. We might have to send in our fisheries people to go and examine how the immediate marine environment has been affected by this and what is happening to the fish supply. It is a society with a strong marine environment. We will certainly have to identify the psychological trauma to young people, to adults, and therefore our psychological testing people, our public health people will have to go in and look to see how especially those with chronic conditions have been affected by the dust and so on. So the broad spectrum of skills, of technical and professional skills, the UWI will be mobilizing those in an orderly fashion so as to get our people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines back in track, functioning as normal as possible. We will take care of the children. We have psychologists who focus on juvenile concerns and so on, and of course the elderly. So the broad range of UWI academic and scientific skills, we are in a position to mobilize and place and placed at the disposal of our community. This is what we do normally whenever there are natural disasters. This is how we mobilize following hurricanes and earthquakes and all of what have we. We go when we have a look. So basically then, the government can tell that it has at its fingertips a tremendous diversity of capacities and to help to stabilize and gradually move to normalize the living and the daily reality for the majority of the citizens. So this is what we do, this is what we're here for, and as we are speaking, that mobilization is taking place.
Thank you so much, Vice Chancellor. And actually, quite a number of the points you raised were some, in fact, are in some of the questions that we are seeing coming through from the UWI Facebook page, as well as from the UWI platform. But I want to go to Professor Robertson with some questions. And the first one is based on your lived experience from 1979, as well as your professional work in Montserrat. What would you say to the St. Vincent people in terms of what can they expect in the coming months, in terms of the quality of life as well as the eruptive patterns?
Okay, I think I'll say what I've been saying before, that we have an active volcano, we have a volcano that's erupting. I think Vincentians have had to deal with volcanic eruption before. The Soufrière volcano is one of the most active in the region. So you have had experience in 79 and 71. Perhaps they can't remember in 1902. So there's a certain amount of communal knowledge and experience of what volcanoes could do. I think what's different this time is that their perception of the scale of what La Soufrière can do needs to change to something that is a little bit more. And therefore, Vincentians, I think, need to realize that once this volcano gets going, it may go on for a little bit longer than they would have expected. And it therefore means that there was going to be some disruption of life to St. Vincent and the Grenadines for some time. It might be a few weeks, we hope, but it could go on for months, given what we are seeing. It doesn't mean that life can't go on. It doesn't mean that one has to think that is the end of anything. There is a substantial part of the country that will be largely unaffected by what the volcano is doing. And once they leave the part that the volcano is doing its thing, in other words, leave the volcano alone to do what it's doing, I think apart from the ash, which will come south from time to time, of course it did significantly, much more so than they experienced before. But apart from the ash, there is a substantial amount of St. Vincent that you could continue living sustainably if you adjust yourself. So it's going to be difficult. They have to prepare for some difficult weeks and perhaps months ahead. But I'm positive. That they can. They're resilient people. They're accustomed to toughness. Vincentians are. That they can deal with it, and I think they can look forward to the fact that Soufrière, after it has done what it's doing, which is not so much destroying, but I would say rejuvenating a substantial part of the country in the north, the benefits in terms of the agriculture, in terms of the landscape, in terms of the ecotourism, in terms of all kinds of things that Soufrière brings with it will be there for them to capitalize on. So they have to hold strain, they have to go on with their lives while it's doing what it's doing, but they have to look forward to the positive aspects of volcanism and La Soufrière, which they have always benefited from, and which will be there as in the future, even though it looks very hard now.
Right. And we also have another question, Prof. Robertson, about a comparison of the scale of this eruption with that of 1979.
Well, it's clear to us that we have moved out of 1979 territory, and I think I've said that before. In 1979, the Soufrière erupted on a certain scale, and given what we have seen thus far, it is clear it is going to be bigger than 1979, and thus far we think it's probably going to be comparable to the 1902 eruption. The 1902 eruption was about 10 times in magnitude more than the 19 79. Now, that sounds very negative, but 1902 still allowed a substantial part of the country in the south to go on living. So the fact that it's going to be bigger doesn't necessarily mean that suddenly more of the country than has been affected will be affected. As I say, the ash is going to be the main thing that people have to deal with. It's difficult, but there are things in place, there are systems in place that you could do, there are things that you can do to minimize that. Apart from that, there's a substantial amount of destruction that can happen on the mountain itself. Most Vincentians know the mountain is the northern 1/3. So once they leave that alone, and I'd encourage anybody that's there, anybody that is in the zones that are supposed to be evacuated to move, once they leave that alone, don't do anything there and try to sustain themselves in the south, that should be fine.
All right. I have a lot of questions for you, Professor, and I know that you're monitoring the volcano, and if anything happens, you have to leave us. I want to go to the VC once again. We have some questions here for you coming through from these look like from persons in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. VC Beckles, one person is asking, can UE Engineering go to St. Vincent immediately and assist the Central Water and Sewage Authority with what's happening with the water system there? As you know, currently in most of the country, the water supply is off. So they're asking if UE Engineering can assist in something like this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Our engineering faculty is at St. Augustine campus in particular is on standby. The principal there is very knowledgeable about these issues. We have been mobilizing our engineering crew in the aftermath of hurricanes, and this is what we do normally. So we have an action ready orientation from the engineering faculty to participate. So it's a matter of coordinating the logistics of movement. I know that there's no aircraft supply, but I know there's regular shipments. The boating system is operational, but we marry our university capacity with the indigenous capacity, the capacity on the ground there in the country, and we coordinate the needs and so on. So all of those issues I know are being coordinated through our engineering fraternity locally and within the UWI faculty. So this is very much what we would expect. We would expect a certain kind of structure of needs. And one of the important areas would be certainly the food supply, the water supply, and importantly, the safety of buildings and so on. So yes, we in the engineering community of UWI are in this process of coordinating as we speak.
All right, thank you. So I hope our colleague in St. Vincent who posted that question is satisfied with your response. Prof. Robertson, I'm coming back to you with questions. As a Vincentian, what support do you think is needed for the people in terms of their recovery? And this person, again, is asking you to pull on your experience in Montserrat, which erupted for so many months in the 90s.
I think we hope that the St. Vincent Soufrière St. Vincent is not going to give you something like Soufrière Hills. It's a different volcano. It's unlikely to operate the same, and the most likely scenario is that you have to deal with the ash hazard. People have been moved from the areas that are going to be most impacted by the volcano, so it's really the ash hazard. So I think in terms of what Vincentians have to deal with is how do you cope with the ash hazard? I know there's issues with water. But those are challenging, but those are solvable. I think we'll have to invest more in terms of water that comes from the ground rather than water that comes from above the ground, on the ground, because if you have ash exposure to ash, it means that it gets quickly compromised. We have to look more carefully at where in terms of planning, long-term planning, where we put critical structures, things like putting certain, how do we plan so that we ensure that we don't put too much assets in areas that in the future could be affected by volcanism? How do we plan so that if there are future volcanic eruptions, we can sustain better the amount of people that we need to sustain in the south. So I think to a large extent, we have benefited from the fact that soufre and volcanoes generally in the region, they don't often erupt. They have long, what we call repose periods, long periods between eruptions. And therefore, we in the region have gotten accustomed to simply the volcanoes not erupting. I think we need to change that mindset. And when we factor in our development plans, when we factor in what we do with our lives, we need to factor in volcanic hazard just as much as we factor in other hazards. But of course, volcanic hazards are slightly different, and therefore it's important that they factor those in. Particularly, I think we haven't factored in terms of volcanic hazard, the impact of ash on everything. We spoke about the water supply, but the other aspects that it would affect. So therefore, I think the utility companies, the other services that you have need to factor that in more. Dr. Severin spoke about the psyche, the ash, persistent exposure to ash, for example, in Montserrat, was one of the things that weighed upon people's mindset. It could become quite depressive. So we need to deal with that. It's not just the physical impact of the ash and what it does in terms of structures, but also the impact of not seeing the sun for substantial times, and that kind of thing can happen in psyche. So the psychological aspects. So I think those are the kinds of things. I think we just need to bear in mind that once we live in St. Vincent, the volcano can erupt. Some of us had experienced it before and thought we had a certain knowledge and scale of it. I think what soufre is showing us, to a large extent, is the full, well, not so much the full extent, but a little hint of its full capacity. I think it's a mountain that we need to watch carefully and plan and ensure that our long-term plans and processes factor into them more the volcanic hazard and the variable kinds of things that those expose you to, and ensure that we build more resilient systems as we move forward.
Great response. I'm going back to my colleagues from the Open Campus in terms of the following up on the psychological element that Prof. Robertson spoke about. I have a question regarding counseling for not just UWI students, but also in terms of persons, evacuees who may be in shelters in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I know you spoke about some psychological outreach. Dr. Longsworth or Dr. Severin?
I can take that. I think initially, this, as Vice Chancellor has said, is part of the menu of things that we have prepared as part of our protocol, and it is often seen as the second guard. But we've noticed that in times of disaster, our psychosocial counselors are very, very important for disaster recovery. And indeed, the Open Campus coordinates with our psychologists and counselors across the region to bring this service into not just UE students and staff, but to the entire population. Given the challenges, the extra challenges we have this time around, in terms of COVID-19 travel restrictions and so on, it really is of benefit that during COVID-19 we created a UE-wide counseling, online counseling access. And that is what can be activated and will be activated to support as much as possible. Again, as the Vice Chancellor said, we have counselors that we have trained that are in St. Vincent and who we can work with remotely to support their efforts on the ground. So yes, psychosocial counseling is not restricted to UE, it is for the entire population. And may I say, particularly for the children who are usually the ones most traumatized by this. They may not, although I must say, Professor Robertson, you explain things so well, so accessibly, but many of the little ones will not understand what is happening, and we recognize that we need to work with them, and we've done quite a lot in other cases, which we will use here, utilizing storytelling and art and so on to support little ones. So yes, we will definitely be going in that area. But as you know, we are still at a point where we can't physically go in, and we must work with our colleagues on the ground to support in the immediate aftermath of what's happening.
Thank you very much, Principal. And in talking about the little ones, I have a question from a father, Professor Robertson, and his little daughter wants to know when things are going to get back to normal.
That's a good question. And if I knew, I'll be even more enlightened than I am now, or I'll be even more famous. But seriously, the way in which volcanoes erupt and the way in which soufre is behaving, there's a large uncertainty in terms of being able to project and say exactly what it has done. People have given the team kudos for being able to pick up the patterns and to give advice that was quite effective thus far in saving lives. I mean, that's why we do what we do. We're trying to make sure that people stay out of harm's way. But it's very difficult, and there's a large margin of error. That's why, one of the challenges sometimes we have in speaking to governments and to speaking to people is to try to make them understand the extent to which we're really very uncertain about what we're doing. Now, thus far, and things could change. Thus far, soufre has been very good to us in that it has generated signals, monitoring signals that we have been able to detect and understand. And based on the experience that we have here in the team and the wider team in St. Augustine, in Montserrat, and our collaborators overseas, we've been able to use that understanding to guide our advice to the governments. Now, if it keeps on behaving in that kind of way, it's possible that what we're going to have is that we're going to have periods in which the volcano is very active. And when I say active, it has explosions, it have discrete explosions, and there might be periods when it goes into sort of intense activity as it did at the beginning. We think that kind of intense activity will become less likely as time goes on. You'll have more discrete events, and we think also the gap in between these discrete events will become longer. Essentially, what's happening up there is that some set of material, magma we call it, has come to the surface, and it has a lot of energy. And it has to get rid of that energy. The problem we have is that we don't know exactly how much of it is beneath the surface that still wants to come out. We're trying all kinds of ways to figure that out. We're taking samples, we're doing measurements. And we have an idea of it, but we don't have an exact idea of it. And further, we don't know if conditions at the top would somehow change how easy it is to get out. So that's why it's difficult to answer that question, to say, well, it's going to finish tomorrow or the next day or the next week. So in the interest of making sure that we don't sort of raise your hopes too much, we will tell you that it's probably going to be at least weeks, less likely months, and even less likely a year. So the most likely thing is a few weeks, probably, this has been going on for 3 months now. We're now into the 4th month. You're probably going to have another month or two of some kind of activity. That is, I mean, I would be surprised if it shuts down tomorrow, for example, or if it shuts down next week. I would not be surprised if it starts thinking of shutting down a little bit longer than that. So that's how we couch it. As we move forward in time, our certainty, because of the nature of the system, becomes greater that certain things will happen or not. So I'm more or less certain that you're probably not going to have tens of years like Montserrat did of dealing with the system. I think you're more than likely going to have something that is more quantifiable in terms of years or months, or most likely in terms of weeks and months rather than in terms of years. So I don't think they have to be worried that, given the system that we have, I think it's less likely for it to go on for many, many years. It's more likely for it to go on for weeks and months. I don't know if that gives any level of comfort, but it means that you can look forward to perhaps next year or a little bit longer, that things would be back to sort of some level of normalcy. That said, though, I can't miss the opportunity to say that The problem with the fact that we wanted to finish fast and it doesn't have any effect is that we then tend to forget it very fast too. And that's a problem, because we need to remember what happened over the last few weeks. We need to remember that this is a volcano, that it can be very disruptive. And therefore, I would like that young child to remember that, so that when they get to be my age and older, when they have when they're in positions where they could influence how we develop and how we move in terms of development in this country, they would make decisions that would ensure that if and when it happens again, we're not so devastated, that we have systems in place. And we had systems, and St. Vincent was one of the most prepared countries in terms of volcanic hazards. But it just shows you how disruptive it is. There's a lot more we can do. And as a young post, you need to make sure that those systems that you need to build your resilience, to make sure that you're not hit back that badly by these hazards and others too, that they're there. And if it's one thing you take from it, is that you should then be more committed to ensuring that your reality when you become older is one that does not mean that every time a natural hazard or volcanic hazard hits us, that we really totally knock down and we can't rise back up, or we can't meet it and hit it back just as hard as it's hitting us. It's not impossible. It just requires us to have systems and processes in place and a mentality that allows us to know that we can do it. And I think we can do it. We just need that same young person to believe that and to make sure that you can make it happen.
All right, I hope that his dad has her viewing this program. Principal, I know we are looking at the UWI's response, Rally Round SVG. So I want you to provide for our viewers once more the three-way to give to the cause.
Yes, thanks again for that opportunity. Yes, so the major ways to donate cash are through the Open Campus's account, EC dollar account in Antigua and Barbuda. And we have the information streaming at the bottom of our screen. For US donations or donations from other countries that are not EC currency, you can donate to our Cayman Islands accounts, and these are both at CIBC First Caribbean Bank. The Alumni office has set up a donation tag on its website, and you will be able to make donations on that through credit card donations in particular, wherever you are in the world. And the American Foundation for UWI is accepting on their website as well donations either online or through credit cards or through even mailing checks to the foundation. And our foundation is a registered foundation in the US, so it is eligible. People who donate through there who are US residents would be eligible for tax credit. And of course, our various campuses and our guild of students across the Five Islands campus, the Mona campus, the Cave Hill and St. Augustine campuses are doing collections in kind, and they are pulling those together in order to get them shipped, particularly for the persons who are in the shelters. So we know we are a very generous people across the region. Rally around St. Vincent and the Grenadines when other countries are in trouble. We get their support, and it's our turn now to support them and the people who are now in need of our help. So please, everyone, there is a way, and if you don't, if none of these work for you, please contact us at our email address, which is also being streamed, stvincent.recovery@open.uwi.edu. So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with everyone and to put our hands and hearts together and to open our hearts and our pockets to support the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Thank you, Dr. Sam.
Thank you. And just to remind our viewers of the website for the alumni online donation, it's www.uwi.edu/rallyroundsvg, rallyroundsvg. And you can go there, as the principal said, and make your donations using your credit card to do that. I have a number of questions still for Prof. Robinson, but I'm going to give him a break and put it to Dr. Severin. Dr. Severin, someone is offering art therapy to students in St. Vincent, and they want to find out if you can help them to connect with the head of the site there.
Yes, art therapy. I mean, this is just amazing, and I hope that this has come through because this person is looking at this and is seeing, you know, what is possible. Yes, definitely. Again, if that person can even send information to that email address, then we can respond and let them know how they can get in touch with the head of site. I mean, I could share her number, but I'm not at liberty to do that. So if that person would contact us through that email address, then we could give the necessary information and channel that person, you know, appropriately. I am grateful, though, that this offer is being made as a result of this program tonight, and it does, in fact, underscore the point that the psyche is so important. I wanted to say something very quickly while I have the floor. In terms of the psychosocial interventions, the good thing about the University of the West Indies is that, again, we are experienced in intervention in those matters. So there's a COVID task force which is led by Professor Clive Landis, and we have heard the tremendous advantages of this and the tremendous achievements. Within that task force, you have the psychosocial section, if you will, led by Professor Wendell Abel. And again, I must say to you that he has a lot of experience in terms of, I even think that he may have had experience with the Montserrat, you know, hurricane. But the truth is that Mrs. Cecile Minot, who I mentioned earlier, a counselor, has been in touch with him. And we're hoping that we could even get a wider network, if needs be, to intervene in what's going on in St. Vincent. I say that to make the point, Dr. Sam, that we are a one university and we have taken a one university approach in all of this so that we are not alone and we have tremendous, in fact, a great depth of backative, as the Jamaicans would say, going forward. So I would like that person to actually contact us through that email address, and we will put you in touch directly with Mrs. Daramp.
To remind them that that email address is stvincent.recovery@open.uwi.edu. All right, and back to Professor Robertson. A question for you that I think the whole of St. Vincent and the Grenadines would probably wish to be answered. Is it possible that the entire country may have to be evacuated at some point?
Well, decisions about evacuation, first of all, is a government decision. So the possibility is something that is up to the government. But I think I will interpret the question in the context that, as the person who's the scientific lead, the person is asking, is it possible that the hazards associated with volcanoes could be such that it compromises the sustainment of life in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? I think that is extremely unlikely. The hazards associated with the Soufrière volcano are going to be mainly focused on the area that we have designated in collaboration with the government as the red and the orange areas. This is not based on hearsay or anything. It's based on study of the historical eruptions, the prehistoric eruptions, and even more of Soufrière. It's based on studies of several persons, several scientists from St. Vincent, from the region, from outside the region. It is based on science that we know that when this volcano erupts, we know how it behaves in its wildest contention as well as its most likely contention. And we have defined them as the areas that are going to be affected most. are going to have all the nasty things that this volcano could do are the red areas, and then on the fringes of that are the orange areas. So the areas that have been evacuated currently, the communities that have been evacuated are the areas that are where people would be unable to sustain life. That said, it is clear that one of the hazards from this volcano that perhaps, and we knew this before, it wasn't properly quantified in that it's not that it was underestimated, but it wasn't as rigorously investigated in a scientific way as it probably should have, is ash hazard. And really, the ash hazards has to do with, to a large extent, how the wind patterns operate. It has to do with what kind of eruptions the volcano have, but it really has fundamental, to a large extent, to do with the wind patterns and how the volcanic activity interacts with that. In terms of the ash hazard, yes, it is possible for the southern part of the country to become very difficult to live in, because not so much because of the ash directly, but because of what the ash does. So, for example, if you didn't have proper systems in place, or if you didn't have resilient systems in place to deal with water, to deal with electricity, power generation and water, and living life, sustaining life, growing crops and all that kind of things, in the midst of excessive deposition of ash, you will have a hard time, because there might be some periods as we in the eruptive cycle, that you could have significant and heavy dumping of ash or deposition of ash in the southern areas. And if you don't have systems in place to respond to that, then it becomes difficult for people to live. So you may do it not because the ash is not going to kill you, but it's going to make life very difficult. And if life becomes very difficult, then the decision might be that you need to move a substantial amount of people further south, say. Bear in mind that St. Vincent is in the Grenadines. So in terms of moving further south, it might mean the Grenadines. It doesn't necessarily mean a different country. So to answer in summary the question is that I think it's very unlikely that even if you have periods of excessive dumping of ash in the south, I don't think currently, especially with the experience that we had so far, that it will become so difficult that you have to move off island. It might be necessary to move some people off island because because of their susceptibility, they're particularly vulnerable to certain kinds of hazard, to the ash, for example. But in terms of the whole population, I think that is unlikely. And secondly, in terms of the area that's going to be most affected in terms of the direct loss of life, the areas designated as red and orange, and the areas by extension, the villages, the communities that have been evacuated, those are the areas that are going to be compromised. Which is why I can't help but make the plug again for those Vincentians who are listening, those people, those hardy people who are still hugging it out in the red or orange areas. You need to leave, because you're putting yourself at risk, and you're putting others who may come to rescue you at risk. But the rest of you who are in the south, you need to find ways of dealing with the possibility that you might have heavy ashfall. It's hard, it's difficult, I know, but it's possible to live still in those areas. It's unlikely for Soufriere to put so much ash in the south, given what it's done so far, given how we're doing it, tracking the system. It doesn't look that it's going to do that for sustained periods. It might do it from time to time because of the wind, but it shouldn't be that you can't sustain your life in the south.
All right, thank you so much. Another question in relation to that is, how long after the eruption is over will these areas be able to be inhabited?
Right. So in fact, it depends. It depends, first of all, on how much deposition you have. So in some areas, you might have a lot of destruction. That is, plants and any kind of flora and fauna might be totally wiped out and destroyed, and you have to restart. There might be some areas where structures would have been destroyed, but it will always be possible to rebuild, and the extent to which you can reoccupy those areas would have a lot to do with not only the level of destruction, but it will have a lot to do with the extent to which there is a plan for the reoccupation and what that involves. And in that regard, I'll suggest that the UWI could actually assist in that. There are people who are in agriculture, particularly, and also people who are engineering, who could advise and I'm sure could assist the government of St. Vincent and Grenadines in terms of rehabilitation of the areas that have been affected. You know, you're going to have these areas that have a significant deposition of ash, a significant deposition of other kinds of volcanic fragmented material, and you have to find a way in which you could rework that into the soil so that it replenishes it in the way that volcanic materials does. There's actually a number of studies that have been done by academics at UWI in St. Augustine. In fact, the Faculty of Agriculture in the past have done work on the 1971, 79, and how you rehabilitate that. I'm not sure if any of those academics are still there, but the knowledge is there, and I'm sure that if you leverage that by getting the assistance of UWI, that you could fast track that. And I would suggest that now is the time to start thinking of that, because you can actually you can actually start studying what's happening now with the intention that you can actually start figuring out what you can do to fast track both the rejuvenation of the area, fauna and flora, but also what you could do in terms of reestablishment of structures in those areas. And there's a lot that can be done in terms of planning now, so that by the time you get to the rebuilding stage and recovery stage, you could speed that process up because you have a plan.
All right, and I just want to follow up on that with a question that has two parts, really. It relates to something you just said. In terms of the use of the ash, two persons here. One is asking about the use of the ash in terms of fertilizer, as well as the use of the ash as a building material. Can you provide any advice on those?
Right, I'll answer that with the one caveat that I'm not an agronomist, I'm not an engineer. I'm a volcanologist, geologist. So my answer is given the context that I have limited knowledge. But my limited knowledge suggests that the ash, if it is properly integrated into the soil, is actually quite nutritious. You know, I know Professor Beckles is from Barbados, but we in St. Vincent have a joke that we say that Barbados always benefits. Of course, it's not thinking it's benefiting now, but actually agriculture in Barbados actually benefits from when Soufriere has an eruption, because while it may affect it immediately, in the years to come, you know, you essentially get a dumping of fertilizer from the volcano from us. So in that regard, you know, there's benefits of the material that's coming out, both in terms of its grain size, but also in terms of its composition. But you have to find ways you have to have a plan for working it into this. You can't just leave it there, because if you leave it there, it takes a longer time for it to get integrated into the soil. In the context of construction material, I would tell that person that all of the construction material that we leave in St. Vincent, using St. Vincent, the sand on the beach, the aggregate that we get from the Rabaca, the rocks that we have, all of that came from a volcano. So in fact, all of the materials that Soufriere producing can be used for construction, but you'll have to perhaps, in some cases, prepare it, because, for example, the fine ash, which could be fantastic as a paving material, you know, when you're paving, you know, you go for the fine sand outside. That's essentially nicer than that, but you may have to wash it, you may have to prepare it. So there's a lot of potential for constructive purposes from the destructive products that are being prepared now, that are being produced. So again, if you had a plan, you could have a plan where, you know, and I was suggesting it to the Prime Minister the other day, that an entrepreneur in St. Vincent could develop a plan to scrape all the ash that's dumping all over the place and stockpile it somewhere, with the intention that once once he has a chance, he could then use it to rebuild some of the same places that are being destroyed. As I said, there's lots of potential, but you just have to think about it, come up with a plan. And I'm sure that, you know, St. Vincent and Grenadines, with the assistance of UWI academics, and I hear Professor Buckles offering that, and UWI is there to help, that you can do it. You just have to, you know, you have to get past the stage that we're at now, which is reacting and responding to the tremendous devastation, and start thinking long term about supportive and about effective ways in which we could make use of what we have been given, even though it's destroying us right now.
All right, thank you. I just want to remind viewers as well that they can follow live as well as accurate updates on the activities of the La Soufriere volcano available on the UWI Seismic Research Center social media platform, at Facebook/UWI Seismic, as well as Twitter.com/UWI Seismic. And of course, they can also check those updates on UWI TV's website at uwitv.tv. Now, Professor Robinson, I have one more question for you. And this one is a little out of the park. And I got it on what the person is asking. Are you aware of any technology, or is it like just too much to think about, of some way of developing some method where the energy from these volcanoes can be harnessed for the advantage of the country or the region?
It's actually not so far-fetched, you know. It's what you call geothermal energy. That is what it is. And the fact that so many of the territories in the region, Dominica, St. Lucia, Montserrat, St. Vincent, in fact, recently, are trying to utilize that heat source for geothermal purposes is indicative of the potential positive benefits of volcanism in the region. So yes, the simple answer, yes, you can try to tap that tremendous power through geothermal energy. It doesn't always work because of various, you have to have certain conditions, and there's a long period to development, but you certainly can. But if I should caution, if the person is thinking that somehow we could tap into the energy that is coming out now, because geothermal essentially what is indirectly doing is tapping into the energy source indirectly. So you have a heat source beneath the surface because of magma, the same molten material that comes out. How you access that energy is by accessing the hot rock, which then heats water that is associated to the magma. You're not trying to tap into the magma itself, because those kinds of forces you can't tap into, you can't control, you cannot harness. We haven't found the technology to harness it yet. What you have to do is, when it's doing what it's doing, which has tremendous forces, you just simply have to move south in the case of our country, or move away and watch it from afar. It's beautiful, it's fantastic to see, but leave it, let it do its doing, because that energy that is coming out there, human beings have not yet, and I suspect they will never be able to, because it's really forces that formed the planets and formed the earth and formed the territories that we have. We haven't gotten to the stage here where we could harness it. So that you can't harness, but you can certainly use volcanoes for geothermal energy production, geothermal sources, and that's something that all the territories should explore and are in fact exploring.
All right, Dr. Severin, I want you to remind our viewers, particularly those in Barbados, about the relief effort that's on tomorrow with respect to water shipment to St. Vincent and for persons who may wish to donate.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Sam. The campus officer responsible for alumni relations, Mrs. Sandra Griffith Carrington, is organizing, along with of course our rest of our team, Miss Aisha Eswick, who is in the HR department. They're organizing the collection points tomorrow at the campus. I think it's the 3Ws oval grounds between 10 and 12. So we're asking anyone who wishes to donate, staff and others, to bring in the water, and we will, of course, accept it, and a team is on hand to package and so on, and then it will be sent off by the Coast Guard pretty soon. But the Coast Guard, of course, are asking us to drop it, I think as soon as tomorrow or the day after. So it is critical that we get all the water supplies, and all those people who are willing to donate, to do that tomorrow between 10 and 12 o'clock at the Kville campus, the 3Ws grounds, really, parking lot, I believe.
Thank you. Principal, once again, I know you're coordinating the efforts for the university. Can you remind us what some of the other campuses are doing and how persons can contribute?
Yes, thanks again. As we were speaking about Kville, the St. Vincent Student Guild Association of the Kville campus, working with the Kville campus's Office of Student Services, will also be collecting non-perishable items at the Office of Student Services. Those can be dropped off there. The Five Islands campus as well in Antigua and Barbuda persons in Antigua and Barbuda who want to donate non-perishables, you can contact the Five Islands campus through their Guild of Students. They have a special space. Similarly, the St. Augustine campus, the principal there informed me that they too, through their deputy principal, Professor Ramnarayan, you can contact them if you are in Trinidad for donations. At the Mona campus, we know that our colleagues at Mona are in Jamaica. We are under tremendous curfew restrictions given the rising cases, and therefore, we would recommend more cash donations out of Jamaica. But we are also very pleased to know that our campus at Mona has indicated very early their support for students from St. Vincent in terms of tuition concessions and waivers. So right across the 5 campuses of the university, we are one in our mission, our commitment to support our students, our staff, and all of the people of St. Vincent who are affected by the volcano.
All right, and we've been going for almost an half, so we're going to wrap it up now. Professor Robertson, I know you've had a very long day and you're still monitoring the volcano with one ears and here with us with the other. My final question to you with respect to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the region is basically what can we expect in the coming days from La Soufrière, based on your knowledge and prediction and scientific background?
Thank you very much, Dr. Sam. I'll avoid that term prediction and assume that you meant forecast. So what do we think can happen? I think simply more of the same, but perhaps initially more of the same means more of what we've had recently, which is the last 2 or 3 days. And this means that we would expect in the coming few days at least that we will have discrete what we call volcanic explosions, or you could just take out the volcano, it's just a technical term. Discrete explosive eruptions from the volcano, discrete explosions. And when I say discrete, single or 1 or 2 pulses of that single. In other words, short bursts of energy that sends material up in the air, produces an ash plume that drifts in the various places, probably produces density currents that go down the mountainside, and that's it. We wouldn't expect to have, at least in the next few days, these intense ash venting episodes that dumped so much ash all over the place and didn't do anything else other than venting. That said, it's possible after this period that we can get into one of those intense periods again. I think it all depends on what happens in the next few days. The signals that we have in currently suggest that the volcano is essentially, at least at this point, running out of some of the energy that it had when it started. And once it runs out of that energy, what is most likely to happen is that it will essentially form a dome that caps itself. Now, that is possible. That could be the end of it. That it could just form a dome and that's it, and that's the last part of the eruption. Or if there's enough batch of fresh magma behind that can then push that dome out of the way, you can then have another explosion, and it's possible that you could go into something bigger than that. We think it's most likely that you're going to have a stoppage, an explosion, stoppage, an explosion, and the time between the stoppage is going to get longer. The duration of the stoppage periods, or the quiet periods, quote unquote, it's not going to be totally quiet. The duration of that might extend, and you will have in between that, you will have these explosions that happen from time to time. So essentially, more of the same, but with less intensity, and with the possibility that it could become intense again at some point in the future, depending on if it has a new batch of material comes up to add to that mix.
All right, thank you. Dr. Longsworth, I want to give you the last word as you encourage others to contribute to the relief effort.
Yes, thank you very much. And of course, what we're looking at is how we support in this immediate phase, where we're looking at, the support for the physical needs of persons who have been dislocated, but also the psychosocial needs of the population that would have, had some trauma, and as I mentioned before, particularly the children, and of course helping the government in terms of coordinating with sister campuses what support we can give in the areas that have been mentioned: water quality, engineering, and so on. So those are some of the immediate needs, but we're looking, of course, to the future. As Professor Robertson says, we're building resilience, and resilience is not just in terms of the infrastructure, but in terms of the human being. And we want to make sure that no one is so displaced that their education, whether it is from primary, early childhood, or all the way up to secondary and tertiary, is abandoned because of this event in their lives. And so we are urging persons to contribute so that we can assist in rebuilding, we can assist in placing, we can assist persons who may have difficulties in funding education for their children, even going forward because of changes in their livelihood. So this is a long-term support. As we've heard from Professor Robertson, this is going to take some time to settle, and even then we have to plan for the next one, whether it is another 70 years or 42 years or whatever it is, but building back better, and bouncing forward, and not just bouncing back for the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So all of your support, and particularly persons who may wish to support by offering their own services in these areas, we'd be very happy to hear from you through the email account, or you can contact us via our Facebook page, our social media pages, and we will get back in touch with you. Thanks to those who have already been very generous, and we know that your generosity is very appreciated by the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the UWI. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much to our members of the panel, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Dr. Luz Longsworth, Professor Richard Robertson, and Dr. Francis Severin. And thank you to our viewing audience for joining us and making this program so successful. You have been viewing another program on UWI TV. Until next time, I am Cleveland Sam. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.